The Mafia
You
boss
thought you
spat
could
on the
steal
black
from me
Maid's
and get
face.
away with it.
The silence in the mansion
You
was
are
deafening.
going to regret.
Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Aaliyah Johnson was no stranger to hardship. She had been working in the Romano family mansion for almost a year now, and every day she faced the same routine: cleaning the grand rooms, dusting the polished furniture, and staying invisible. No one paid much attention to her. She was just another maid, a mere servant in the eyes of the Romano family. But today was different. Aaliyah had been cleaning the library when she overheard something she shouldn't have. It was a conversation between Vincent Romano, the infamous Mafia boss, and one of his associates. The conversation wasn't about any trivial matter. It was about a large sum of money, a deal that could change everything. Aaliyah knew she couldn't ignore what she had heard. She didn't want to get involved, but something told her she had to. She had the information, and it could be the key to stopping a tragedy. As she continued her work, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that today would not be like any other. She was on edge, aware that the smallest mistake could lead to disaster. Just as she finished wiping down the last shelf, the door swung open. Vincent Romano entered, his towering presence filling the room. He was dressed in his usual dark suit, his face cold and unreadable. His eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, they landed on Aaliyah. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Aaliyah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew better than to speak out of turn, but today, she couldn't help herself. "I overheard something," she said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "Something I think you need to know." Vincent's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "I don't need you to be involved in my business," he growled, taking a step closer. But Aaliyah didn't back down. She stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. "It's not just your business," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "It's everyone's. And you're making a huge mistake." Vincent's eyes narrowed, and before he could respond, his associate burst into the room. "Sir, we need to discuss the matter immediately," he said, his voice urgent. Vincent looked back at Aaliyah one last time, his gaze cold and dismissive. "Get out," he ordered, his voice as sharp as a knife. Aaliyah stood there for a moment, the silence in the room deafening. She had done it. She had spoken up, and now there was no turning back. As she walked out of the library, her mind raced. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was certain of one thing. The balance of power was about to shift. Aaliyah had done something no one expected. She had taken a stand. And Vincent Romano, the man who thought he could control everything, was about to learn just how wrong he was. As Aaliyah walked down the long, cold corridor of the Romano mansion, her mind was racing. What had just happened felt like an impossible turn of events. She had never imagined speaking out in front of Vincent Romano, let alone challenging him directly. The powerful Mafia boss, with his dark suit and cold demeanor, was not a man easily confronted. And yet, there she was, standing up to him, her words ringing in the air long after she had spoken them. She had felt the weight of the moment, the silence that followed her statement, and for the first time, she realized that she wasn't just a maid in the mansion anymore. She was someone who mattered. The fear she had felt earlier had been replaced by a sense of purpose, and she knew that whatever came next, it couldn't be avoided. Aaliyah couldn't go back to being invisible, not after this. As she reached the end of the hallway, she heard Vincent's voice calling from behind her. "Aaliyah," he said, his tone more controlled than before. She paused, but didn't turn around. "You think you can change anything?" His words were measured, but there was a hint of something else, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm not trying to change anything," she replied, her back still turned to him. "I'm just trying to make sure you don't make the same mistake again." The silence between them stretched for a moment, thick with tension. Then, she heard his footsteps approach. She didn't move. She wasn't sure what he would do next, but she didn't feel afraid anymore. "You think you know everything?" Vincent asked, his voice colder now. "You're just a maid. You don't belong in my world." Aaliyah finally turned around, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. "I may not belong in your world, but I know what's right," she said, her voice unwavering. Vincent stared at her, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps respect. It was hard to tell, but it was enough to make her realize that the power dynamic had shifted, even if only a little. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice soft but carrying an edge of finality. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. Aaliyah stood there for a long moment, her heart still racing from the encounter. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that things would never be the same. She had spoken up, and now she had to see it through. As she made her way back to her quarters, her mind wandered back to the words she had overheard in the library. The deal that Vincent and his associates were involved in was more than just business, it was dangerous. Aaliyah could feel the weight of the information she now held, and she understood the risks of what she had done. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. She had already crossed the line, and no matter what happened, she would not let the truth be buried. As she entered her room, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. She had always been a silent observer, blending into the background, doing her job without question. But now, she had taken a step into the unknown, and there was no going back. Aaliyah's hands shook slightly as she sat down on her bed, her thoughts still swirling. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? She couldn't let Vincent's power intimidate her. She had to stand her ground. There was too much at stake. And in that moment, Aaliyah realized that this was bigger than her. This was about something far more important, about justice, about doing what was right, no matter the cost. But as she sat in the silence of her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that her actions had set something in motion, something that would change everything. She wasn't sure what that something was, but she could feel it, deep inside her. The silence in the mansion was deafening, but it was only the calm before the storm. Days passed after the confrontation in the mansion, and the weight of what Aaliyah had done continued to linger in the air. She tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on her daily tasks, but the incident with Vincent Romano haunted her. She had never expected things to escalate the way they had. For years, she had worked silently, keeping her head down, never raising her voice, never questioning the world around her. But now, everything had changed. The mansion, with its gleaming marble floors and golden chandeliers, felt different. The walls seemed to watch her, and every creak of the old house made her heart race. Aaliyah knew she had done the right thing, but the fear of what might come next gnawed at her. What if Vincent was truly the kind of man who would retaliate against anyone who crossed him? What if he sought revenge? Aaliyah pushed the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to think like that. She had taken a step into a world she knew little about, and now there was no going back. As she continued her work, cleaning the vast hallways and sweeping the floors, she kept her eyes open. The mansion was always busy, filled with people who came and went. Most of the staff worked quietly, going about their tasks without a word. But something felt different now. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation, as though something was about to happen. That afternoon, as Aaliyah was dusting the grand piano in the living room, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting to see one of the staff members, but instead, it was Vincent Romano. He walked into the room with his usual confident stride, his eyes scanning the space. For a moment, their gazes met. Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. Vincent said nothing at first, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet from her, watching her with a sense of curiosity she hadn't seen before. "You've been busy," he said, his voice softer than usual. Aaliyah didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, not daring to speak. She knew that anything she said could be misinterpreted. She was waiting for him to speak again, for the inevitable punishment or dismissal. But instead, he spoke again, his tone still calm. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said slowly. "About the deal. About what you overheard." Aaliyah's heart raced as she tried to hide her surprise. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge their conversation. She hadn't expected him to take it seriously at all. "You're right," Vincent continued. "There are things happening that I didn't see before. Things that need to be addressed." Aaliyah felt her breath catch in her throat. Was he actually listening to her? Was he admitting that she was right? She had to remind herself to stay calm. This was still Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss who had the power to destroy her life if he wanted. "I don't know if you understand the gravity of the situation," Vincent said, his voice low and measured. "But I'm willing to listen. I'll need your help, though." I need someone who knows how to navigate this world. Someone who won't back down when things get tough. Aaliyah's mind raced. Was this really happening? Was Vincent asking for her help? She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. But then again, what choice did she have? She had already crossed a line. She couldn't go back now. I'll help, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But I need to know that I can trust you. Vincent's eyes softened, just slightly, and for a brief moment, Aaliyah saw a glimpse of the man beneath the powerful exterior. You have my word, he said, his voice sincere. I won't forget what you've done for me. Aaliyah nodded, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that, for better or worse, she had just become a part of something much bigger than herself. As Vincent turned and walked away, Aaliyah's mind began to race. She had agreed to help him, but what did that really mean? What kind of help did Vincent need? What kind of world was she stepping into? She didn't know, but she knew that from this point on, her life would never be the same. I have to admit, Aaliyah thought as she walked through the mansion's grand hallways, everything felt different. The air, once filled with tension, now had a strange weight to it, as if the house itself was waiting for something. It was strange, this feeling of power she had never experienced before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. No, she had crossed into a world where her voice mattered, a world where Vincent Romano, the powerful Mafia boss, had actually listened to her. She knew this was a dangerous game, one where the stakes were higher than she could imagine, but it felt like the only path she could take now. She had no choice but to move forward. As days passed, Aaliyah began to notice subtle changes in the mansion. The staff was on edge, whispering in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening. The usual calm, unspoken order that Vincent had imposed over his household was starting to crack, just a little. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't all bad. With every passing moment, she felt more in control of her own fate. Vincent began to approach her more often. At first, their conversations were brief, just a few words here and there. But over time, they became longer, more meaningful. He would ask her opinion on various matters, from the state of the mansion to decisions he needed to make about his business. Aaliyah wasn't sure why he was turning to her, but she couldn't deny that her words were starting to have an impact. One evening, as the sun set and the mansion's grand chandelier flickered on, casting its golden glow across the room, Vincent called for her. Aaliyah had just finished her chores and was on her way to her small quarters when she received the summons. The moment she stepped into the room, she noticed something was different. Vincent, usually composed and intimidating, was standing near the window, staring out into the sprawling estate. His posture was tense, as if he were carrying a weight that he hadn't been able to shake off. Aaliyah, he said without turning to face her, his voice softer than usual, almost distant. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the deal, and I've realized something. I've made some mistakes. Big ones. Aaliyah blinked, unsure of how to respond. She had expected him to be angry, to lash out, but instead, there was an honesty in his voice that took her by surprise. What do you mean? She asked cautiously, taking a step closer. Vincent turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of frustration and regret. The deal I was working on. It's a mess. A complete disaster, and I've been too blind to see it. But you were right. It's all about power, and I've been abusing it. I've been so focused on my own interests that I've lost sight of what really matters. His words hung in the air, and Aaliyah could feel the sincerity in them. For a moment, she didn't know how to react. Was this the same man who had spat in her face just days ago? Was this the man who had once looked at her like she was nothing more than a servant? Aaliyah stood there in silence, weighing her options. She could walk away. She could go back to her quiet life, to the world where she didn't have to confront people like Vincent Romano. But something told her that walking away now would be a mistake. She had already seen too much, and she couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. What are you going to do about it? She asked, her voice steady. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with the weight of the situation. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I need help. I need someone who can see past all the power and the wealth. Someone who isn't afraid to call me out when I'm wrong. Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She had always known that Vincent was more than just the cold, calculating Mafia boss. She had seen glimpses of the man beneath the facade, and in that moment, she realized that he was more than capable of change. I'll help you, she said finally, her voice firm. But you have to understand that I won't just be a pawn in your game. I have my own rules. I won't stand by and watch people get hurt. Vincent's expression softened, a faint hint of gratitude in his eyes. I understand, he said, his voice quieter now. And I won't take that for granted. As Aaliyah left the room, she felt a strange sense of resolve wash over her. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She had stepped into something far bigger than herself. And no matter what happened, she wasn't going to back down. I walked through the mansion the next day, my steps echoing in the vast hallways. It felt like the mansion had grown quieter, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. The tension was palpable. Vincent had asked for my help, and I had agreed, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a much larger and more dangerous world than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was involved in something far more complicated. As I made my way to the kitchen, I caught sight of Vincent once more. He was standing near the grand staircase, talking quietly with one of his associates, his usual confident posture replaced by a more subdued demeanor. I watched for a moment, wondering what was on his mind. What had changed? Had I really made a difference? Or was this just another play for power? I shook my head. It didn't matter. I had made my choice. Now, I had to see it through. As I entered the kitchen, I was greeted by Maria, the head cook, who always seemed to be in a rush, but never failed to offer a warm smile. "Morning, Aaliyah. You're early today," she remarked, her hands busy preparing breakfast. "Is everything okay?" "Just getting an early start," I replied with a smile, though my mind was elsewhere. I could feel the weight of the decisions ahead. Vincent's request for help hadn't come without its own set of risks. His world was dangerous, and I had no idea what I had really gotten myself into. Maria gave me a knowing look, but didn't press the issue. She had seen the quiet way I had worked here for so long, and I wasn't the type to stir trouble. But now, everything was different. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I had already made the decision. As the morning passed, Vincent's presence seemed to follow me around the mansion. He wasn't directly involved in my work, but I knew his eyes were on me, whether it was through the brief exchanges we had or the quiet conversations he had with his associates. It was as though he was watching for my next move, waiting for something. And I was waiting, too. Waiting for him to truly show that he was serious. I had no doubt that he was a man of power, but power alone could only take him so far. In his eyes, I was still the maid, still the one who cleaned his floors and made his meals. But now, I wasn't just that. I was a player in his game, whether he liked it or not. Later that afternoon, I found myself standing in front of his office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been summoned to meet him, and for the first time since I had agreed to help, I wasn't sure what to expect. As I walked into the room, Vincent looked up from his desk, his eyes locking onto mine. "Aaliyah, come in," he said, his voice as calm and steady as ever. "Have a seat." I sat down across from him, my hands folded in my lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavy, as though we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "You were right about everything. About the deal, about the way I've been handling things." I looked at him, surprised. This wasn't the cold, calculating Vincent I had known. This was something else. Something raw, vulnerable even. "I don't want to make the same mistakes anymore," he continued, his voice softer now. "I've been using people, taking advantage of situations, and it's all caught up with me. But you were different. You saw through it." I sat there, stunned. I had never expected Vincent to admit something like this. He was the last person I thought would show vulnerability. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk as he thought. "I need you to help me find a way out of this mess. I don't know how to fix it, but I know I need to start somewhere. You've seen things I haven't. You have an eye for details, for what really matters. I need you to guide me." I took a deep breath, the gravity of the situation hitting me fully. This was no longer just about Vincent or his mistakes. This was about something bigger, something that could change everything. "I'll help," I said, my voice firm. "But only if you're truly committed to change. I won't waste my time if you're not ready to do the work." Vincent nodded, his expression serious. "I'm ready," he said, his voice unwavering. "I can't go on living like this. I won't. And I need your help to make things right." As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I wasn't just helping Vincent anymore. I was helping myself, too. I had made the choice to be part of this, and now, I had to see it through. Whatever came next, I knew that I had taken control of my own fate, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was no longer just a bystander in my own life. I woke up early the next morning, the sunlight barely peeking through the curtains. My mind was already racing, thoughts about the new reality I had found myself in swirling around me. The mansion felt different today. Everything seemed more alive, almost like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Vincent had given me a chance, and now I had to prove that I could help him. I knew that he was trying to change, but the question remained. Was it too late? Could someone like him truly change? As I prepared for the day, I couldn't help but wonder if I was doing the right thing. I had promised to help him, but I had also opened a door to a world I had no real understanding of. There were people who worked for Vincent, associates, and other Mafia connections, all of whom had no interest in seeing the boss change. They thrived on the power and the fear Vincent had cultivated, and I wasn't sure what they would do if they found out that he was trying to turn a new leaf. I knew the risks, but I also knew that this was my chance to make a real difference, not just for Vincent, but for myself as well. I was no longer the maid in the background. I had stepped forward, and now I had to act. As I walked through the grand hallway, I passed by Vincent's office. The door was slightly open, and I could hear his voice, low and measured, as he spoke to someone inside. I paused, uncertain if I should interrupt. But before I could make a decision, I heard my name. Aaliyah, Vincent called from the office, his voice inviting but with an underlying urgency. I took a deep breath and walked in. Inside, Vincent was standing by his desk, his usual suit looking slightly disheveled, as if he had been up late working. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man behind the Mafia boss. "Come in," he said, motioning for me to sit. I did as instructed, sitting across from him, my hands folded in my lap. He looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I've been going over everything," he said. "The deal we're involved in is more complicated than I thought. There's a lot more at risk than just money." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "There are people who don't want things to change," he continued. "They want to keep things the way they've always been, with power and control. But I'm not sure if that's the right way anymore." His words were heavy, and I could tell that he was struggling with them. It was strange to hear Vincent admit uncertainty. He was a man who had always been in control, always making the decisions, always holding the power. But now, he was looking to someone like me for guidance. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel the weight of his request pressing down on me. Vincent paused, his fingers tapping on the desk as he thought. "I need you to help me navigate this," he said. "I've been too focused on what I want, and I need to start thinking about what's right. There's a way out of this, but I can't do it alone." I took a moment to absorb his words. He was asking for more than just advice. He was asking me to be a part of something far bigger than I had ever anticipated. It was more than just helping him with a deal. It was about helping him change the course of his entire life, his entire business. "I'll help," I said, my voice firm. "But you have to understand that I won't just follow your lead blindly. I need to know that you're serious about making things right." Vincent looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I am serious," he said quietly. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix them. I just need someone who can see things differently." I nodded, knowing that this was a turning point. We were no longer just talking about business. This was about trust, about integrity, and about the kind of person Vincent Romano wanted to be. "Then we'll do this together," I said. "But remember, I won't back down. If you want to change, you have to be willing to face the consequences." Vincent met my gaze, his expression resolute. "I understand," he said, "and I'm ready." As I left the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. This was no longer just a job. This was a mission, one that could change the course of everything. I had stepped into Vincent's world, and now, together, we had to navigate the dangers that lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The days that followed were tense. Aaliyah found herself caught in the whirlwind of Vincent's growing uncertainties, all while navigating her own thoughts. The mansion felt like a battleground, with power shifting between silent glances and hushed conversations. Vincent was trying. She could see that, But the weight of his past decisions was heavy, and Aaliyah wasn't sure he fully understood the consequences of what he was trying to change. She had made a commitment, but every day, the question lingered. Was he really ready for the transformation he claimed he wanted? The work that lay ahead wasn't simple. It wasn't just about fixing a deal or making a few business changes. It was about dismantling an empire built on years of manipulation and power, and that kind of thing couldn't happen overnight. As Aaliyah walked through the grand hallways, she noticed the subtle changes. Vincent was speaking to more people, consulting with associates, something he rarely did before. The mansion, once filled with an eerie quiet, now had a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Still, there were moments of doubt. Aaliyah had always been practical, realistic even. She wasn't one to romanticize people or ideas. She needed to see results, to know that this wasn't just a passing phase for Vincent. The turning point came one afternoon when Vincent asked to meet her again. They hadn't spoken in a few days, and Aaliyah wasn't sure if that was a good or bad sign. She knocked on his office door, taking a deep breath before entering. As she stepped inside, she saw Vincent sitting at his desk, papers spread out before him, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. For the first time, he looked like a man struggling with his own mind. He wasn't the controlled Mafia boss she had come to know. This was someone different. Someone vulnerable. "Aaliyah," he said, looking up from his papers. "Come in. Sit." She did as instructed, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Vincent. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice lacking the usual certainty. "About everything. About my life. About the decisions I've made. I thought I could control everything, but now I see I was wrong." There was a pause, and for a moment, Aaliyah couldn't find the right words. This wasn't the Vincent she had expected. This wasn't the man who had spat in her face only a few days ago. This was someone else, someone who seemed to have reached a breaking point. "You were right," he continued, his voice quiet. "I've been living in a world where power is everything. But now I see what it costs. It's cost me my humanity. It's cost me the people who actually matter." Aaliyah remained silent, watching him carefully. She couldn't bring herself to offer reassurance just yet. The words he was saying felt different, but she needed to see if they were backed by actions. "I've made deals that hurt people. I've hurt people. And I've spent so much of my life running from the consequences," Vincent went on. "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I want to try. I want to make it right." Aaliyah took a deep breath, her eyes locking with his. "You can't undo the past, Vincent. But you can make different choices moving forward. You can choose to be a better man, not just in business, but as a person. But it won't be easy, and you'll have to face the consequences of your actions." Vincent nodded, his face tight with frustration and determination. "I know," he said, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Aaliyah studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but she saw none. It was a strange feeling, seeing Vincent like this, but part of her felt relieved. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent looked up at her, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. "I need someone who can help me navigate this. Someone who understands what it means to start over, to rebuild from nothing. I need you." The words hit Aaliyah hard. She wasn't just helping him anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that would change the course of both their lives. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was a chance she couldn't ignore. "All right," she said, her voice calm and firm. "We'll do this. But you have to understand, it won't be just about your business. It's about who you are, what you stand for. And you have to be ready to lose everything if it means getting back on the right path." Vincent nodded again, his expression resolute. "I understand," he said. "And I'm ready." As Aaliyah left his office, she felt a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a deal or a business transformation. This was about redemption, for both of them. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that they had crossed a line. There was no going back now. The following days brought a strange new rhythm to the mansion. Vincent was more determined than ever to make things right, but the pressure was mounting. The deeper Aaliyah got into the world of business negotiations, the more she realized how dangerous the game was. Vincent wasn't just facing his own demons. He was up against a network of people who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests, even if it meant using violence or manipulation. Aaliyah had to stay sharp. Every step forward meant stepping deeper into the shadows of Vincent's world. It wasn't enough to make the right decisions. She had to be prepared for everything to fall apart at any moment. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, not just in Vincent, but in herself as well. Every time she saw Vincent grappling with his choices, struggling to make amends, she realized just how much she had been underestimated. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an integral part of the decisions being made, a force in the transformation that was slowly unfolding within the mansion's walls. One evening, as Aaliyah sat in the small staff room, going over some paperwork Vincent had left for her, the door opened, and Maria, the head cook, walked in with a concerned look on her face. "Aaliyah, have you seen Vincent?" she asked quietly, her tone cautious. Aaliyah looked up, frowning. "No, why?" "There's been a change. People are starting to talk," Maria said, glancing over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was listening. Aaliyah stood, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "Vincent is making moves. And some people aren't happy about it. They're starting to question his decisions, his leadership," Maria explained. "I'm worried, Aaliyah. He's in over his head, and if this goes wrong, he's not just going to lose his power. He could lose everything. And so could you." Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, everything?" Maria hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just business, Aaliyah. The people Vincent is involved with, they don't just walk away from things. They don't forgive, not easily. If they feel threatened, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests." Aaliyah felt a chill run down her spine. She had known the risks, but hearing them so clearly from Maria made everything feel too real. She had been warned, and now it was up to her to make sure she was prepared for whatever came next. "I know you're trying to help him, but you need to be careful," Maria continued. "People like Vincent, they attract danger. And once it finds you, it doesn't let go." Aaliyah didn't say anything at first. She just stared at Maria, processing the gravity of what she had just heard. It was true. She had gotten involved in something far bigger than herself, and there was no turning back. She was in this now, and there was no way out. That night, as Aaliyah sat alone in her room, the weight of Maria's words pressed heavily on her mind. Vincent was trying to change, but the world around him wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. She had seen the cracks in his empire, and she knew they were only the beginning. There was no such thing as a clean slate in Vincent's world. Every choice, every action, had consequences. Aaliyah couldn't ignore that anymore. She had made her decision to help him, and now she had to see it through. But with every passing day, the stakes got higher. She wasn't just protecting Vincent anymore. She was protecting herself, too. The mansion that had once felt like a safe space now felt like a trap, its walls closing in on her with each new piece of information she uncovered. The silence in the house was deafening at times, and Aaliyah could feel the eyes of everyone watching her every move. The whispers were getting louder, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone acted. Vincent had made promises, but promises in his world were fragile. Aaliyah couldn't afford to trust anyone fully, not even him. She had to stay one step ahead, or risk losing everything she had worked for. The next morning, Vincent called for her again. She walked to his office, her thoughts swirling. When she entered, he looked up from his desk, his face tense but resolute. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Aaliyah nodded and sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know things have been tense," Vincent continued, rubbing his temples. "But I can't back down now. I've made too many promises to people who are counting on me. I've set things in motion, and I can't let it all fall apart." Aaliyah studied him carefully, noticing the strain in his eyes. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. "But you need to be prepared for what comes next. People won't just let you walk away from your past." Vincent looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said finally. "But I have to try. I can't keep living like this, pretending that everything is fine. I have to make things right, no matter what it takes." Aaliyah met his gaze, her voice steady. "Then let's make sure you're ready. Whatever happens, we face it together." The weeks passed, and the mansion's atmosphere grew increasingly charged with tension. Every day felt like a delicate balancing act, with Vincent trying to move forward and Aaliyah trying to keep up with his transformation. He had started to meet with his business partners and associates more frequently, but there was a certain heaviness in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something to crack. Vincent was putting up a front, but Aaliyah knew that underneath it all, he was still grappling with his own fears and insecurities. She was beginning to see more of the man behind the Mafia boss persona. He had always been the powerful figure, the one who called the shots, but now, in the quiet moments, Aaliyah could sense the uncertainty in him. It wasn't weakness. No, it was something deeper. It was the realization that he couldn't keep controlling everything and everyone, and that perhaps, for the first time in his life, he was going to have to rely on others, something he had never done before. One afternoon, as Aaliyah was working in the library, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his face set with determination. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice steady. "I need your help with something important. It's time to move forward, but I can't do it alone. Will you stand by me?" Aaliyah had expected this. She had known that eventually, he would come to her for help again. But this time, it felt different. There was no bravado in his voice, no sense of dominance. Just a man, unsure, asking for help. And for some reason, it made her heart swell with something she couldn't quite name. She stood up from the desk, meeting his gaze. "Of course," she replied, her voice calm. "I've been with you this far, and I'm not backing down now." Vincent nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Aaliyah saw a glimmer of relief in his eyes. They both knew that what came next would change everything. The stakes had never been higher. "I've been looking at the numbers, the accounts, everything. It's all connected, but it's tangled," Vincent said, his brow furrowing as he explained. "There's no easy way to untangle this mess, but if we don't act fast, it will be too late. We're not just talking about money here, Aaliyah. This is about our future, about my future. And I can't afford to lose it all." Aaliyah absorbed his words carefully. She had been on the periphery of his world for so long, watching from the sidelines. But now, she was no longer just an observer. She was a part of it, and she had a choice to make. She could walk away, go back to her quiet life, or she could stand with Vincent and face the storm together. There was no question in her mind. She had already made her choice. "So, what do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady, her mind already working through the possibilities. "We need to meet with my associates," Vincent said, his voice tight. "I'm going to level with them, tell them the truth. They're not going to like it, but it's the only way forward. I need you there. I need someone who sees things clearly, someone who can speak up when I can't." Aaliyah nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. This wasn't just about a business deal. This was about Vincent's very survival in the world he had created. And if he was willing to risk everything, so was she. The meeting was scheduled for the following day, and as the time drew closer, the tension in the mansion grew thicker. Aaliyah spent the night reviewing the files Vincent had given her, going over the numbers and the details. It was a complex web of deals, alliances, and threats. She had no illusions about what was at stake. If things went wrong, it wouldn't just be Vincent who suffered. It would be everyone who had ever trusted him. She was ready, but she knew the challenge ahead would test them both in ways they hadn't prepared for. The next day, they gathered in a large, imposing conference room. Vincent's associates sat around the table, their faces unreadable, their eyes sharp. They were the men and women who had helped build his empire, and now, they were the ones who could either help him rebuild it or tear it apart. Vincent stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edges as he took a deep breath. Aaliyah stood beside him, watching carefully as the room fell silent. "I know this isn't easy," Vincent began, his voice steady but carrying a weight of vulnerability that none of them had ever seen before. "I've made mistakes. I've made decisions that have put all of us at risk. But I'm here today to fix that. I'm here to tell you the truth, to be honest about where we stand." There was a brief pause, and Aaliyah could feel the tension in the room as everyone waited for him to continue. "I'm not the same person I was when we started this journey. I've seen the damage, the harm we've caused, and I can't continue this way. I'm here to make things right, but I need your help. I need all of you to stand by me. To do what's right, not just for us, but for everyone we've hurt along the way." Aaliyah's heart pounded in her chest as Vincent's words hung in the air. This was the moment that would define everything. This was the moment when everything could either crumble or come together. She held her breath as Vincent turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet plea for support. She stepped forward, her voice calm and firm as she spoke. "What Vincent is saying is the truth. We've all been part of this, but now is the time for change. We can't keep living in the past. If we want to move forward, we need to face the consequences, no matter how difficult it may be. The room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the faces around the table began to shift. The cold, calculating expressions softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Aaliyah saw the possibility of something different, something better. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to take, together. The meeting had ended, and the room was filled with an uneasy silence. Vincent's associates had left, and Aaliyah stood by the large window, her hands resting lightly on the cool glass, staring out at the sprawling estate. She had spoken, she had stood by Vincent, but now the weight of what they had just done began to sink in. The promises had been made, but promises were fragile. The real work had only just begun. Vincent, standing by his desk, seemed lost in thought. Aaliyah could see the burden of the moment weighing on him. The man who had once been unshakable, the Mafia boss who had ruled over his empire with ruthless precision, was now standing there, unsure of the path ahead. Aaliyah knew that despite the strides they had made, nothing was guaranteed. "You did well today," Vincent's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to look at him, meeting his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you," he continued, his tone softer than usual. "You gave me the strength I didn't even know I had." Aaliyah nodded, unsure of what to say. The room felt heavy, charged with the uncertainty of their future. "I just spoke the truth," she said quietly. "But now, Vincent, we have to make sure we follow through." Vincent walked over to where she stood, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. "You're right," he said, pausing beside her. "But the truth alone isn't enough. I've spent my life building this empire, and now I'm trying to tear it down, piece by piece. I need to be prepared for whatever comes next. I can't afford to fail." Aaliyah could hear the strain in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. This wasn't the man who had dismissed her in the past. This was a man who was questioning everything he had known, everything he had built. "You don't have to do it alone," Aaliyah said, her voice steady. "But you have to trust me, Vincent. Trust that we can rebuild, but we have to be honest about what needs to change." Vincent was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he were weighing her words. "I know," he said softly. "I know. And I trust you, Aaliyah. I wouldn't have asked you to help me if I didn't." Aaliyah felt a weight lift slightly from her chest. It was the first time she had truly felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just helping Vincent because he had asked her to. She was helping him because she believed in the change he was trying to make. And, in some strange way, she believed in the change she was trying to make within herself. Over the next few weeks, things began to move at a faster pace. Vincent started making the necessary calls to dismantle the toxic parts of his empire, the deals that had kept him in power but had hurt so many others. But it wasn't just the business side of things that were changing. Vincent had started meeting with people who could help him navigate the mess he had created. He had reached out to people in his past who could offer advice and guidance. Aaliyah was there every step of the way, helping to coordinate everything, offering support when he faltered. But as things began to shift, Aaliyah found herself caught in the crossfire of his decisions. The mansion, once a symbol of Vincent's unchallenged rule, now felt like a place where secrets were buried and old wounds reopened. She was no longer just a maid, but a partner in a world that was slowly unraveling. And with every step forward, Aaliyah was reminded of how deep the scars ran, not just for Vincent, but for everyone involved. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and negotiations, Aaliyah found herself alone in the library once again. She was sorting through some papers when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Aaliyah," Vincent said, his voice sounding different. "Can we talk?" She turned to face him, sensing the weight in his words. "Of course," she said, putting the papers down. Vincent stood in the doorway, looking like he had been carrying the weight of the world. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice strained. "I've made a lot of changes, but there's still so much more to do. People are watching. They're waiting for me to slip up. I don't know if I can keep this up. I don't know if I can fix everything." Aaliyah walked over to him, her eyes softening as she took in the exhaustion that was evident on his face. "You don't have to do everything at once," she said quietly. "You've already made the hardest decision of all, Vincent. You're trying to change, and that's more than most people would do." Vincent let out a deep sigh, and for the first time, Aaliyah saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Maybe you're right," he said. Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought. Aaliyah nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. One step at a time, she said gently. One step at a time. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, as if both of them understood the journey ahead. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long while, Aaliyah felt like she was no longer just a bystander. She was part of something that was changing, something that had the potential to be better, not just for Vincent, but for everyone. And as the evening wore on, Aaliyah knew that no matter what happened, she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, with Vincent by her side. Days turned into weeks, and Aaliyah found herself growing more entrenched in the world she had once only observed from the sidelines. The changes Vincent had made were starting to show, but the journey was far from over. The mansion, once a fortress of power and control, now felt more like a place of constant tension, a place where every step could lead to a breakthrough or a collapse. Vincent had changed, there was no doubt about that, but with each new decision, each new risk he took, the pressure mounted. Aaliyah could see the toll it was taking on him. He no longer wore the calm, confident exterior he had once prided himself on. Now, he seemed more human, more vulnerable, and yet there was still a fire in his eyes, a determination that refused to fade. The question, though, was whether it was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the mansion's grand windows, Aaliyah found herself standing in the library again. She had been reviewing documents, trying to piece together the last bits of information for Vincent's next big move. The air in the room was thick with the weight of the decisions they were making. Just as she was about to stand up, she heard Vincent's voice. "Aaliyah," he called, his tone steady but carrying a sense of urgency. She turned, surprised to see him standing in the doorway. "Can we talk?" She nodded, closing the file in front of her. As she walked over to him, she noticed that he looked different, more strained, more burdened. "What's going on?" she asked softly. "I've made a decision," Vincent began, his voice low. "One I'm not sure I'm ready for, but it's the only choice I have left." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What decision?" "I'm going to confront them," Vincent said, his gaze unwavering. "The people who have been holding everything over my head. The ones who have been making threats, pulling strings behind the scenes. I can't keep running from them. I have to face them, face the consequences of everything I've done." Aaliyah felt a chill run down her spine. She had known Vincent's past had left a trail of enemies, but to confront them head-on was dangerous. She wasn't sure if he was truly ready for the fallout, but she knew that he believed in it, and she believed in him. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. "You've already done so much, Vincent. You've come this far. Confronting them could ruin everything we've worked for." "I know," he replied, his eyes hardening. "But I can't live in fear anymore. If I keep hiding, if I keep allowing them to control my every move, I'll never truly be free. I need to do this, Aaliyah. I need to take control of my life again." Aaliyah looked at him, studying his face, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. This was the moment he had been working toward. She didn't want to see him fail, didn't want to see him take a step into the unknown without being prepared for the consequences. But at the same time, she understood why he needed to do this. "Then let's do it," she said finally. "We'll face it together. But we have to be prepared for everything. This could be the beginning of something better, or it could be the end." Vincent nodded, a small but grateful smile crossing his face. "Thank you, Aaliyah," he said. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You don't have to," she replied. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The following days were filled with planning. They mapped out the risks, strategized every possible outcome, and prepared for the meeting with Vincent's enemies. Aaliyah had never been a part of something so high stakes, and yet, she felt an odd sense of purpose. This was more than just helping Vincent. This was about taking control, about standing up against the people who had manipulated and used him for so long. When the day finally came, the tension in the mansion was almost unbearable. Aaliyah could feel it in the air, a charged silence that hung over them as Vincent prepared to confront his past. She stood by his side, as she always had, ready to face whatever came next. The meeting took place in a dark, nondescript building in the heart of the city. Vincent, Aaliyah, and a few of Vincent's closest associates entered the room, the air thick with the scent of power and danger. The men Vincent was meeting with were just as ruthless as he had once been, but now, it was Vincent who held the power. He wasn't the man they once controlled. He had changed, and they could see that. "You've come to talk," one of the men said, his voice smooth but with an edge. "But I'm not sure you're ready for the consequences of your actions." Vincent stood tall, unwavering. "I'm ready for whatever comes," he said, his voice strong. "This isn't about power anymore. This is about the truth." Aaliyah stood behind him, her presence a quiet but powerful support. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tension, and the shifting power dynamics in the room. The tables had turned, and Vincent was no longer the man who was afraid to speak the truth. He had found his voice, and with Aaliyah by his side, he was ready to fight for it. As the conversation continued, Aaliyah could sense that the balance of power was shifting once again. The men around the table were beginning to realize that Vincent was no longer the man they once knew. He had grown, and his strength wasn't in his ability to control, but in his willingness to confront the past and make things right. By the end of the meeting, Vincent had laid everything on the table. The truth was out, and it was clear that he wasn't backing down. As they left the building, Aaliyah looked at him, her heart swelling with pride. This was the man he was meant to be, and for the first time in a long time, she believed in the future they were building together. After the tense meeting, Aaliyah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had been necessary. Vincent had done what he had promised. He had faced his past and confronted those who had once controlled him. But as they left the building and stepped into the car, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. Vincent had taken a step toward change, but now, the real work began. As the car sped down the city streets, Aaliyah sat in silence beside him, her thoughts racing. She had never been part of something like this before. She had always been an observer, but now, she was in the thick of it, helping Vincent navigate a world she barely understood. She could feel the weight of his expectations on her shoulders, and the pressure was starting to build. "You did it," Aaliyah said quietly, breaking the silence. Vincent glanced at her, his eyes tired but filled with a sense of purpose. "I had to," he replied. "I couldn't keep living in the past. It was time to face it. But I know this is just the beginning." Aaliyah nodded, understanding. She could see the change in him, but it wasn't enough to erase everything that had come before. The damage had been done, and it would take more than one meeting to undo the years of manipulation and control that had defined his life. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent looked out the window, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Now we move forward," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We keep making the right choices, even when it's hard. We rebuild what's been broken. But we can't do it alone. We need to find people who will help us, people who believe in what we're trying to do." Aaliyah felt a spark of hope at his words. She had always known that change wouldn't come easily, but seeing Vincent so determined made her believe that it was possible. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, something that had the potential to make a real difference. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift in the mansion. Vincent kept his promises, working tirelessly to clean up the mess he had created. He reached out to former associates, cutting ties with those who had once been loyal but were now hindrances to his plans. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was willing to support his new direction. But little by little, Vincent started to rebuild his empire, this time on his own terms. Aaliyah was by his side every step of the way, offering her insights and helping him navigate the complex world of business and power. She had become more than just a maid. She was his partner in this journey, and he knew he couldn't have done it without her. Yet, even as Vincent worked toward his goals, Aaliyah couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The changes they had made were important, but there were still many obstacles ahead. Some people would never forgive Vincent for the mistakes he had made, and the consequences of his past actions were bound to catch up with him sooner or later. But as she sat in the mansion's library late one night, Aaliyah realized that she had already made her decision. She had committed to this journey, and there was no turning back. She would stand by Vincent, no matter what came next. The following day, Vincent called her into his office again. This time, he looked more relaxed, his face softer than it had been in weeks. "Aaliyah," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to thank you for everything. You've helped me more than you'll ever know." Aaliyah sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. I'm just doing my part, she replied, offering him a small smile. Vincent looked at her for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. No, he said finally, his voice quiet. You've done more than that. You've been the one constant in all of this. You've believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. Aaliyah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she quickly masked it with a calm expression. We're in this together, Vincent, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Vincent nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. Good, he said, his voice firm. Because I need you. I can't do this without you. As Aaliyah stood to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was an integral part of something that had the potential to change everything. It wouldn't be easy. It would be a long, hard road, and there were still many battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, Aaliyah felt like she was on the right path, and that path was one she was walking with Vincent by her side. The days following Vincent's decision were filled with small victories and significant setbacks. Aaliyah had become more than just an assistant. She was now a trusted confidant, a partner in his journey to rebuild his life and empire. She watched as Vincent made difficult decisions, severing ties with people who had once been loyal to him, but were now obstacles to his future. He was taking risks, but they were calculated risks, driven by a newfound desire to do things right. Vincent was no longer the man who lived by the rules of the underworld. He had made a commitment to change, and Aaliyah was by his side, helping him navigate the treacherous path ahead. But as the weeks passed, Aaliyah began to realize just how much was at stake. They had made progress, but the world Vincent had built was not easily undone. The people who had benefited from his past decisions were not going to let him walk away from his empire without a fight. Aaliyah could feel the tension in the air. It was in the way Vincent's associates spoke to him, in the way the staff at the mansion moved with a nervous energy. There was a sense of unease, a feeling that things were about to change, but no one knew how or when. The pressure was mounting, and Vincent knew that the real test was still to come. It wasn't enough to change his business practices. He had to confront the people who had once controlled him, the ones who would never forgive him for stepping out of line. And that was where Aaliyah came in. She had become his sounding board, the person he turned to when he didn't know what to do next. She had a way of seeing things clearly, of cutting through the noise and focusing on what mattered most. But as much as she had been helping Vincent, Aaliyah knew that she too was at a crossroads. She had invested so much into his transformation, into the idea that they could make something better out of the ruins of his past. But as time went on, she began to question whether it was enough. What if Vincent's change wasn't enough? What if, despite everything, he couldn't escape the past that haunted him? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aaliyah found herself standing alone on the balcony, looking out over the vast estate. She had been thinking about everything, the changes Vincent had made, the progress they had made together, and the challenges they still faced. The weight of it all was starting to press down on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She heard the door behind her open, and without turning around, she knew it was Vincent. You're still awake, he said, his voice low. I thought you might be. Aaliyah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I'm just thinking, she said softly, about everything. Vincent walked over to where she stood, his eyes searching her face. What's on your mind? He asked, his voice gentle. Aaliyah hesitated before speaking, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm just wondering if this is really going to work, she said quietly. You've made so many changes, Vincent. But what if it's not enough? What if the people we're up against don't care about your transformation? What if it's all just too late? Vincent's expression softened, and for the first time, Aaliyah saw the uncertainty in his eyes. I know you're worried, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. I'm worried too, but I can't give up now. I've come too far, and I'm not going to let anyone stop me. Not now, not ever. Aaliyah looked at him, her heart racing. She could feel the intensity in his words, the conviction that burned behind them. But she also knew the reality of the situation. Vincent wasn't just fighting for his business. He was fighting for his very life, for his future. And that kind of battle wasn't easy. I'm with you, she said finally, her voice steady. I won't back down. We've come this far together. But we need to be ready for what's coming. We need to be ready to face everything head on. Vincent nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. I know, he said, and I won't do this without you. As they stood there together, Aaliyah knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would be obstacles along the way. But as long as they faced it together, there was hope. Hope that Vincent's transformation wasn't just a dream, but a reality that they could both build together. The next few days were filled with more planning and more difficult conversations. Vincent's past continued to haunt him, but he was no longer running from it. He was confronting it, head-on, and Aaliyah was right beside him. Together, they began to see that there was more to their future than just the business. There was a life beyond the mansion, beyond the empire Vincent had once built. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, Aaliyah felt like they were on the right path. And no matter what came next, they were in it together.